Welcome to TezTalks Radio. I'm your host, Marissa True, and on today's episode, I am joined by not only a former colleague, but a friend of mine, David Tng. David is the newly appointed Managing Director of TZ APAC, the Asia-focused Tezos adoption entity right here in Singapore. So hi, David. How are you this morning?
Great. It's the start of Q3, so it's going to be very exciting times.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of change to come, especially within the Tezos ecosystem, because it sounds like a lot of momentum is building. But of course, today's conversation is all about focusing on Tezos in Asia, and within that, a little bit more about the blockchain landscape at large within the region. But we'll start with the basics, as is always traditional on the show. First, can we hear about your journey into blockchain?
Yeah, I started my journey in blockchain very early on. So what got me really interested was that I remember I actually heard about Bitcoin when the founder of Silk Road got arrested. It was just all over the news. And that I was actually exploring. Okay, what is this? What exactly is the dark web? What exactly is this whole ecosystem that nobody's really aware of? Tried my hand in mining Bitcoin, wasn't very successful. So whoever that told you that they actually mine Bitcoin from their laptops in 2013, well, it doesn't work. I've tried that. So yeah, and yeah, like the next experience with it was in 2016, 2015, when I was actually I was actually at a fintech startup. So at that point of time, a lot of payments company, they're actually doing ICOs. They're trying to actually sort of like revolutionize the way that you could use cryptocurrencies to make payments. So that was my second experience, and I noticed that hey, um, there was a gap in the market in terms of how these startups better communicate and actually talk about their products, because they are really good tech people, but they don't actually know how to talk about or position their products to the audience. So that was my second rodeo, and of course, during the bear market, I took a step back and came back again in 2020 in 2020. Yeah.
I think that's what's very interesting about, especially being in a bear market right now, is you notice that people sort of come into waves. So the early entrants know to take a step back, and then once the market picks back up again for the next cycle, they step back into the game. But what's consistent is that they always return. And you've had a variety of roles, particularly within the Tezos ecosystem and TZ APAC specifically. So as mentioned, you're the newly appointed managing director. Prior to that, you were head of institutions, and prior to that, you were head of growth. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what your role at TZ APAC entails? And also, for those who are actually unfamiliar with TZ APAC as an entity, what is the function that it serves within the Tezos community?
Yeah, I think especially we're all in the sort of like the blockchain industry. I think the only constant thing is change, and pretty much the speed of the change. Yeah, and especially this is something that's consistent not just in the blockchain industry, but also in the community as well. That if we actually notice the environment and the ecosystem, we will have to sort of like pivot. So when I initially started with when I initially joined the Tezos ecosystem, I think the key aspect was that hey, we need to actually address a lot of the retail community, as well as build a very strong community in Asia. So that was primarily my focus when I was head of growth. How do we actually address the landscape in Asia, how to actually build communities, how to make communities sustainable, what type of communities could we actually start building. And this could be it could be retail, it could be a art community, it could be a developer community. So those are sort of like the how we address those audiences. So that position was pivoted to take care more towards enterprise institutions, because most of these communities, they have already grown to a level where they are self-sustaining. They can organize meetups, and sort of self-organize without much intervention from from TZ APAC. um, and at the most, most we will just come in terms of like, okay, if you want to actually organize the activity, we're coming to support you, or we actually fly in to actually join that activity itself. The second area where we are looking at, head of institutions, I think it's more of addressing the applications that are built on Tezos. So there's so many amazing products that's built on on Tezos, a lot of dApps and everything. But but in terms of how they actually speak to enterprise and institutions, they are a lot of them are really young. They don't actually have the experience or the wealth of knowledge to actually know how to sell their amazing products to this Dutch enterprise. So a lot of what I've done over there was actually connecting the dots, connecting these parties together, and also pretty much shilling both parties, shilling the enterprise to the debt, as well as like shilling the debt to the enterprise, so that they actually have a meaningful conversation and a meaningful, possibly partnership. So that's a lot of what I've done. Yeah, with head of institutions. But as a function wise, I think probably when you hear when you hear about TZ APAC, you will really see us as an ecosystem adoption entity addressing the Asia Pacific. So we really see ourselves as champions, advocates, enablers for Asian or Asia-based projects. And it's two ways round. If there are projects, global projects that wants to come to Asia, we will be the parties to approach. And if there are Asia-based project that wants to go global or within Asia, then we'll be the right party to approach as well.
So there's a very broad scope of activities for one fairly small team. And
Yeah.
I can say that based on my experience of having worked there for a little while. And what is super interesting is that I think Asia is a region where people tend to underestimate the volume of activity that's actually happening here within the blockchain landscape, just because it isn't the region that speaks the loudest about its growth and its adoption rates. So, based on your experience and your time at TZ APAC, what does the blockchain landscape look like throughout Asia, based on your interactions across these different markets?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at Asia Pacific, it's a very unique region in comparison to Europe and North America. The reason is that every single country it's very different. Number one of the biggest issues tackling Asia Pacific is language, where majority of the countries they speak only their own language or very minimal English. So there is there is a requirement to sort of um, address each of these countries with their own through using their own language. And there's also a second area where um, in terms of in terms of uh, interaction, they do if you look at like Japan, Korea, and some of these other countries, they do have a strong preference towards someone that knows the cultural norms of the country, like in terms of addressing them, etc. So I think there is a lot of complexity when we are actually tackling Asia Pacific because of how fragmented it is. And also, if you're looking at the legal, the political, the regulatory perspective, it's a very different um, approach of if you're looking at how Hong Kong approach blockchain and cryptocurrency as compared to a country like Indonesia or Malaysia, how they actually approach this industry. And of course, like I think the last thing is also if you're looking at the technology and the educational aspect, there's very uneven tech education in Asia, as well as Asia is really for most countries a mobile first approach. So that's very different from if you're looking at Europe and US, because the most popular games, if you're looking at games, the most popular games in Asia are all mobile games. While we will really see Minecraft, Roblox, and and the likes of Dota or League of Legends, more towards the European side. Yeah.
Okay, so if we were to look at what APAC what makes APAC particularly unique compared to geographies like Europe and North America. It is its complexities across a regulatory front, it's how fragmented it is, and it's the uneven levels of tech adoption throughout the region, especially given how much more mobile first it is. And for better or for worse, blockchain is not necessarily mobile first. So it deals with a whole new set of hurdles and challenges to overcome. And I think in many ways, that level of friction to blockchain adoption in a region is enough for many people to underestimate the ability for APAC to catch up to a competitive level as the leading markets like Europe and the US. So why do you think APAC should not be underestimated?
Yeah, I think the key point is that like whenever we are looking at any reports in terms of like users or like activity, Asia as a whole, APAC as a whole, they always come up like in at the top. If you look at the number of users, Philippines, Vietnam, they're always like the heavyweight users. There's India as well, where India has always been a traditional tech hub. Whether we're in blockchain or not, it's always one of the strongest tech hub in the world. If you're looking at DeFi, Thailand has always been in the forefront for DeFi. Even in 2016, 2017, there's a lot of payments, finance projects that are coming from Thailand. And of course, if you're looking at China, even though they actually ban cryptocurrencies, has been a lot of blockchain development in China as well. A lot of the biggest projects came out of China. A lot of the biggest exchange came out from China. And last of all, I think if you bring it back into the Tezos ecosystem, one of our largest creator ecosystem in Asia would be Indonesia as well. So they have really amazing artists, and the sheer number of creatives in Indonesia is just overwhelming. And that's not to sort of remove Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand, where they have a thriving gaming ecosystem as well. Some of the largest gaming guilds in the whole blockchain industry came from Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand. So I think that's why Asia should never be underestimated, because of the sheer number of adoption, the sheer number of users, even with the challenges that we spoke about earlier.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about the diversity of that user base as well, because as you said, if India is at the forefront of blockchain development, as is China, and then you have Thailand at the forefront of DeFi, and then Indonesia for creators, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand again for gamers and also creators. There seems to be really healthy communities and really active ecosystems that I think are perhaps not that visible to the broader blockchain communities who tend to operate in English and are therefore maybe not necessarily that aware of how many people are actually using the same technologies. So then to throw Tezos into this picture, what sort of position does Tezos have in the APAC landscape?
I think some if you're looking at some of the hotspots for especially for Tezos, where it's particularly popular, one of it is one of the most important ones is really Indonesia, because what why it really appeals to the creators in Indonesia is that Tezos actually allows, not just Tezos but blockchain in general, it allows a lot of these artists to actually have be playing on an equal footing with the European artists, the American artists, with art with and I think the blockchain is the great equalizer, because having their artworks priced in a common currency, I think that's very meaningful for them, because it means that their works don't actually have to be priced in the Indonesian rupiah, as compared to a European artist where they get to price their works in the euros or US dollars, or or the Swiss francs. I think that's particularly meaningful to really get this equalizer. And the other portion is also how affordable it is to actually mint work in on Tezos. So one of the reasons, because if it costs you even 10 US dollars to actually mint artwork on other chains. $10 is more than a day's salary for most Indonesians. In fact, it could be a week's salary for some of the Indonesians, especially on the low income side. So I think that's something that's just to put it in perspective, how much the cost of meeting their work, for them to actually experiment, how much they actually have to sort of commit to that, which is very important when we look at why it's popular in some of these markets. And of course, like if you're looking at gaming, Philippines are huge gamers. They have been huge gamers, especially in even in the non-blockchain side in Asia. So I think that's one of the reasons as well, why that it's a particular hotspot for Tezos here.
I like the idea that by using a cryptocurrency like Tez, you create common market conditions across a variety of different economic
Yeah.
circumstances throughout the region. That also makes it equally competitive when you are, say, for example, you're an artist who's minting your work on a platform like FX Hash, where you are in the company of artists from everywhere in the world who are also subjected to the same sort of arena to sell their work. We touched on earlier, like India being a particular hotspot for the developer ecosystem for Tezos in Asia. But what does the developer ecosystem look like within the region, and where does Tezos fit into that picture as well?
So in terms of the developer ecosystem, we do have a strong hub in India. So there's Tezos India. So you might have met Puvi and Om. They're fantastic. People. They've been working very closely with us. So one of the things that we really do is really see how do we collaborate with universities as part of the very first step in terms of education, because students in students are always the earliest form that we can actually touch in terms of introducing them to blockchain, introducing them to Tezos. We worked a lot with these universities to actually create programs and workshops. So one of the universities that we work with in Singapore is the School of Computing at the National University of Singapore. And we do and what we do is actually we train some of the students to be able to deliver these workshops, so that they sort of form a student group and and actually participate and talk about in workshop and hackathons. So I think that's the first step, especially if you're looking at creating any developer ecosystem. The second step is of course okay, so now they know about the technology, they have read about the technology. What can we do with these students that are aware? Usually what we do, so the second step is actually running hackathons. So the hackathons, I think, is serve as a meaningful way where these students can now start being creative in actually trying to solve problem statements based on the knowledge they have learned. And of course, the third step is what we are something that we have just completed recently. It's ongoing process as well. It's our incubator program. So after they run hackathon, after they actually complete the hackathons, I think the students, they'll be like, okay, yeah, I got these amazing projects. I want a hackathon. What's next? Do I go back to school, or do I actually is there some resources provided? So that's where we actually created the TZ APAC Tezos incubator program. So with this incubator program, it's more towards we realized that there was a big market need where these developers that participate in hackathon, they build great products, but again, they don't know how to actually pitch their products to VCs. They don't know how to actually find product market fit. They need refinement in order to raise funds. So that's where we run an incubator program to actually sort of to actually foster these projects, get them to a stage, and actually create host a demo day where we invite a lot of the largest VCs, largest enterprise that we are connected to, and then they actually present or demo demo their product live um, to these audiences. So that was actually last week. It's very recent. We managed to get so the cohort, this was actually cohort 2. So cohort 2 was 15 participants. Three of them dropped out because their product wasn't ready to actually be pitched to the audience. And of the 12 teams, 10 actually flew down to Singapore to pitch live. And I think that's very meaningful because when you actually have this face-to-face time, you actually manage to actually build relations. And even for the two that are not pitching live, we actually ensure that there was a proper like filming beforehand, so that when they actually deliver a pitch is not live, but it's in a very meaningful way where it's very presentable, and it's like no it's very they can actually people visitors can actually watch it and sort of view that. Yeah, so I
Mhm.
think that's a lot about how we build a whole developer pipeline across Asia, and of course it's especially meaningful in India, it's especially meaningful in Singapore, it's especially meaningful in even Philippines, Vietnam. We have projects from there as well.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that TZ APAC's, I guess, developer marketing strategy is there's three sort of key targets. I think you have the Web3 native builders who need to become attracted to Tezos and incentivized to build on Tezos. Then you have the Web2 builders who need to learn how to program onto Web3. And then you have the junior developers who are probably going to be Web3 native from the start because they have the opportunity to learn it at a very young age and immediately start building. And what it also sounds like is programs like this, the TZ APAC Tezos incubator, is that all the resources are being provided to basically provide as much support as possible to guarantee both longevity and an increased likelihood of success, especially when it comes to things like exposure with VCs, because that's when a business idea is going to gain a little bit more traction, a little bit more support, and perhaps most necessarily, a lot of external advice as to how to make something work. Because when you are, a student, a recent graduate, a young developer, all you know is the code that's in front of you before you understand how to plug it into the bigger picture of turning it into a business plan, coming up with a model for profitability, having a marketing strategy to encourage user base growth. And so I think it's very interesting that these programs are being developed to become a lot more comprehensive than the conventional hackathon. What's next in terms of this program? Like, is it going to continue on in a cyclical fashion, or are there going to be more product iterations that are going to upgrade
Yeah.
this even further?
So in terms of the program, we have quite a bit of success for cohort 2. So we have one project that's actually funded by Draper, it's Tim Draper himself. We have another project that's actually funded by Baidu, which is one of the largest search engine in China. So there are considerable success that we found with some of the projects on incubator cohort 2. And something that we realized that it's a lot of resource from my end to actually we initially wanted to do this incubator program twice a year, but it's quite about a lot of resource in terms of just bring the mentors in, hosting the master classes so that these projects can actually learn how to build a mission driven company. And of course, I know even organizing demo day itself is a full production by itself. Because there's a live audience as well on stream. So there was a streaming crew, getting flying the teams in, settling accommodation. This is a massive sort of like beast by itself. So we are thinking of actually doing that rather than actually running this twice a year. We're actually doing it annually
Mhm.
for the incubator program. But we're also thinking, okay, so if some of these projects, what do we do with them if they actually raise funds, and what do we do with them if they do not manage to raise funds? I think that is always progressing the train of thought about how to actually sort of make this a full cycle where it's self-sustaining. And I think the next step that we're looking at for these startups that we have been incubating is how do we providing the support in a more in a more in a less prescriptive manner to actually help them find success. Maybe if we can identify some problems, some key problems with some of these startups, in terms of, they need introduction to enterprises, they need introduction to ecosystem applications, they need introductions to communities. We will actually sort of like support these projects to actually find or actually reach out to the audience that they are seeking.
Right.
So I think that's the next step, really helping them. Yeah,
Okay, so the first two iterations are going to essentially inform a much bigger but sort of higher quality and a lot more comprehensive program that's to come, I guess, next year or at the very end of this
yeah,
year. And then
yeah,
to put this sort of developer initiative to one side, we can't neglect, the strength of the artistic and creative community within APAC. And I know that is a community you are especially passionate about. So can you tell me more about the Tezos art ecosystem within Asia? Like which markets, what are the styles that seem to be really popular? Who's making a name for themselves by minting on Tezos? Like, what does that community look like?
yeah. If you are looking at the art market, the art ecosystem, the creator ecosystem in, especially if you're looking in Asia, right? Like it's again, it's demonstrating about how vibrant Asia is, especially in terms of art styles and everything, and how fragmented it is if you're looking at it in another way. So especially if you because I was talking about, like, Indonesia, the tech literacy, everything. They have really amazing artists, and like, and most of the artworks they are creating is actually more towards, like, line art, visual art, because it's a lot of the creators, they don't actually have, before Tezos, they don't actually have access to, like, um, having a PC, a laptop, or whatever. Yeah, usually some of them actually create works using their phones, or even using, if they have tablets, they'll be using the tablets, which is the form of, like, of creating artworks. So in Indonesia, like, one of the very big artists that actually made a name for themselves would be Arya Balarama. So he's very popular on Twitter itself. Like, he's a big fan base. He's been creating a lot of works on Tezos since the Hikatnat days. So that's very early on. And even when we moved to Object, he also has been creating on Theia and other other platforms. He is when the Mandalorian was released, he actually had created a huge banner commissioned by Disney, and it was actually displayed all over Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia, and that was a huge accolade to demonstrate how much he has actually made a name for himself. That, even Disney is aware of him, actually commissioned him to actually create a Mandalorian image, artwork, with his art style. So I think that's key, as well as, like, we have seen, like, a budding generative community in Taiwan, and in Japan. So when I was at Bright Moments, Tokyo, which was earlier this year, I've met a lot of, like, generative artists as well as AI artists that has already been creating on Tezos, based there, and I was not even aware of the community. So I think that's something that is showing, like, the demonstration of, like, how vibrant the scene is, where we have, like, really um, accomplished line artists, as well as, like, visual artists, or artists that are using, like, tools like Fabric to actually create artworks, as compared to, like, generative artists that we are seeing in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. And of course, I know there's a very prominent AI artist that's based in Korea as well. That's always been creating on Tezos.
And do you think it's a challenge for, these Asia-based artists to find their footing when they are up against, the dominance of South and North American as well as European artists? Or do you think the vibrancy of the ecosystem within the region is, one, enough to carry them here, and two, enough to kind of bring them to the level of awareness of, global art institutions that tend to be more Western oriented?
I think success of these artists can be measured in many forms. For instance, for Aya Mularama, the fact that he got commissioned by Disney, that's
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's very clear success.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, like in terms of like collecting at the moment, the majority of the collecting is happening more towards generative art. So I think that's a bit about success can be measured in very different forms as a whole. But the key point, of course, it's ensuring that there are resources available for a lot of these artists. So one of the strongest resources that these artists have is these self-organized communities that we have actually worked with, and actually sort of enable them to take a lead in terms of in terms of actually talking to other artists as well. So in Indonesia, we have IDNFT, which is they are a group of artists that they self-organize. It's across multiple cities in Indonesia, and we actually worked with them on a campaign where we feature 17 artists from that community, and they come from 17 different cities in Indonesia. So it's Indonesia is a very big country, and these are not tier one cities. So it demonstrates the vibrancy, because it means that these artists, even though they are in different cities, it's not tier one cities. They know about creating art on the Tezos blockchain. They are connected to the ecosystem, and I think that's particularly meaningful. It means that they have the resources to sort of if they need to ask a question, they have the resource to actually get answers for that.
Hmm.
We also work with Metarupa,
Hmm.
which is another Indonesian community, and they do a lot of activations. With the upcoming one being the Indonesia Independence Day, so they're running a campaign to actually sort of activate the artists to actually create works to with the theme towards the independence of Indonesia. So I think those particularly those resources are meaningful outside of just being on Twitter, just being connected to a global community. That they have a in-country, very personal, very native community to talk to as well.
So it sounds like a perhaps unconventional but very powerful discovery tool for a lot of these artists, because they're, like we said, we're sort of engaging with them in these open marketplaces that sort of puts everyone on equal footing. So suddenly everyone can be a lot more recognized for the merit and the quality of their work rather than where they come from, no matter, how remote, whether it's a tier two or a
Yeah,
tier three city. But then it does beg the question of, we are in a bear market, unfortunately.
yeah.
And so things have been arguably a lot more precarious lately. What sort of impact has that had on adoption efforts in general, whether it's to artists, to, builders and coders, to the community? And how has that impacted TZ APAC's ability to execute within the region?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the pivoting comes from, in terms of strategy. How do we actually address the ecosystem? The So one of the challenges that we face is, of course, if you're looking at the creator ecosystem, um, especially in Indonesia, and and a few of these other countries, the collecting of traditional artworks, that means like visual artworks, has been definitely dropping a bit from these artists. So that's where we really find we're trying to think of, okay, so who are the other collectors that could actually sort of enable them. What are the other opportunities we can actually provide these artists, or actually create an environment for these artists to actually succeed. And that's where I think our approach towards going more to focus on enterprises and institutions come in. So, for instance, one of the things that we are doing is we're talking a lot more with galleries. We're talking a lot more with museums, and this would give these artists um, a method of actually collaborating with these traditional institutions, where they can actually introduce the non-Web3 collectors, or actually give them exposure and build their whole success as an artist. So I think that's very key to us. Of course, I know the intention is, again, how do we is for the community and to the ecosystem. How do we actually enable them? It's just in a different form. Then if you're looking at the projects that we are talking to in the incubator program, we are looking at how do we actually introduce them to enterprises. How do we actually um, um, ask them meaningful questions like, hey, do you really want to do B2C, or is it meaningful for you to actually do software as a service B2B? Because usually with B2B it's a bit more consistent. Of course, it's really up to the team on how they want to address their audience. And if they are B2B, then that's where we actively we're always speaking to brands, we're always speaking to enterprises. We try to connect these two parties together so that they can actually go further. They can actually sort of demonstrate demonstrate a use case with their product, especially with a brand. So that's how we are sort of addressing it. We're looking at no more towards like how could businesses experiment, but at the same time when they experiment, they are using products that are or the existing community that's on Tezos, whether it's the developer community, whether it's the dev community, whether it's the artist community, just connecting these two parties together.
Right. So it's basically shifting or pivoting slightly and seeing meaningful adoption as any means of the integration of Tezos technology without Tezos necessarily being overtly forward facing. So
Yeah.
embedding the technology within these institutions, within enterprises who want to use the blockchain infrastructure as a bit of like a service infrastructure almost, and making sure that network activity on Tezos stays healthy, whether the users are overtly aware of the blockchain they're working on or not. Is that right?
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Like I think the most important part is of course Tezos, the blockchain itself, it should in a very meaningful manner, if the and also in the perfect world, the blockchain itself shouldn't be the most visible component for the audience, because of course the audience, there are a lot of them is actually just Web 2 or not especially Web 3 literate. So the most meaningful is of course you don't need to know what Instagram is built on, you just use Instagram.
Mhm.
So we would like products that are built on Tezos to be sort of a stage where, oh, you don't actually need to know that they are on the Tezos blockchain, but these are really amazing products that everybody's using. And I think that's the way to go.
Right. So it's basically the technical advancement of Web 3 with the look and feel of Web 2 that people know and love so much,
Yeah, focus on the user journey and the user experience.
which I think was a friction point for many developers because they were focused on building good product. But then when it came to the end user, because crypto is not a simple place to interact with, it was very difficult for it to be a seamless experience. And I
Uh,
mean, with all of these challenges in mind, whether it's to do with the state of the market or the fragmented complexities of TZA or of APAC, sorry, as a region, why should people remain bullish on the growth of Tezos within APAC?
I think just a demonstration of how much just one application can do. So for instance, one of the whole creator movement really started out with no hand, and with just this one application, it started a whole community in Indonesia. It started a whole community in Philippines where they're actively creating artworks, and they they are actually enabled by the manner. I think as a whole, for Tennis blockchain, a lot of the applications are built with access in mind, giving access to give access to the blockchain to communities that may not be able to sort of afford the premium on other chains, as well as how to make it meaningful that they could use it easily. So if you're looking at just the Kukai wallet, they use social sign in. If you are looking at um, object or Hikana, when you want to meet work, it's simply as uploading an image and just filling up 4 views. So I think that's very meaningful for the audience. And with the mobile penetration rate and everything that's in Asia, I think as well as the growth in Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, it's very it's very bullish thing, because a lot of the applications that are built on Tezos now are going towards the mobile direction, and these are the biggest markets that could be disrupted
Mhm.
with the advancement of mobile first, better user experience, better user journey.
Mhm. So what I'm hearing is
Yeah,
that once the basic tools are provided, it doesn't take too
yeah,
much else to drive a lot of momentum within the region, and it tends to be self-starting just on the basis, and perhaps if I were to speculate, on the fact that if people are not designing for these regions or with these regions in mind, these regions very much design for themselves because they know very much what the users need, what they want, what they like, how they behave, and are able to create custom solutions that are specific to that market. And that's what makes it so exciting, is because you see a total diversity in product and user behavior.
yeah. So maybe just highlighting more of the latest campaigns that went out. So one of our incubator project, Guestback,
Mhm,
they have actually launched. So Guestback is a web wallet, where people can actually just sign into an account. Then they actually get a test address, as well as they are also they are in a way they are going towards a super app direction, where they're going to be the WeChat, or a lot of enterprises can actually integrate into them. So they have launched a campaign with Ultra Milk from Indonesia.
mhm,
So that's huge, because that's a very big brand. And over, I've not checked the latest numbers, but I know that in just 1 week of the campaign, they've already managed to open 38,000 wallets, and 38,000 community members joined the Ultra Milk community. So I think that's particularly meaningful, because it demonstrates that just targeting Indonesia itself, using an Indonesian debt as well as an Indonesia brand, we can get this sort of
mhm,
results. So there is nothing to not be bullish about. I think it's just we are always just one step away
mhm.
from really the finding really a lot of traction in Asia. Yeah,
So it's basically how you can reap the rewards of hyper localization, which is something I think people tend to underestimate, because everyone always thinks to
yeah,
gain massive traction, you go overseas, you go international, you go global. When what we're seeing is there's so much appetite within, single markets within a region that can almost carry the entire operation itself. And I think it's really funny because I actually grew up with Ultra Milk being sort of like the little school box milk carton of choice, and it's really funny to
yeah.
see how they are stepping into this NFT world and this Web3 space for themselves. So it's funny to see that evolution. um Before we wrap up this conversation, I do want to ask what the plans for TZ APAC are. Like, what is in store for the year ahead? What are initiatives that people should pay attention to? And also, of course, in your newly appointed role, what are the key mandates that you want to deliver on?
Yeah, I think the key approach that we're taking to doing the bear market is really to um, really give ourselves a bit of time to sort of reset and take a look at broader picture, and start asking okay, some of these initiative, are they actually sustainable? What's the sort of what's the 3 year plan for this initiative? And also really understanding from the partners that we're working with, what do they actually want out of this collaboration, or is it purely transactional? I think that's really key to surviving. And of course, I think that one of the things that we will be constantly doing is we will still constantly move forward. We constantly keep building, because we want to make sure that the system, the ecosystem is as robust as it can, when the bull market comes, which nobody knows when it exactly is, but it's just the preparation, making sure that we did our homework beforehand. In terms of some initiatives, the first one has already launched, which is the Ultra Milk. So we're speaking to a lot of brands, actually linking them up to ecosystem applications, dApps, So I think that's something that you can look forward to over the next 6 months, as a lot of these conversations are going to be more coming to maturity as well. Um, Fingers crossed that it closed off, but but I think that's something that I think the whole gig ecosystem could look forward to. That means more collaboration between brands and applications built on Tezos.
Well, it sounds like you have plenty to be excited about, but it also sounds like you have a lot on your hands. So, with that in mind, I will set you free and let you go. But thank you so much for this conversation. I think Asia is one of the areas that, I mean, for you and I being in it, we see a lot of the traction, a lot of the pace of the development in this market. But I think we need to do a better job of shining a light on it so that everyone in the world can recognize just how promising or how much potential is within this geography just in itself. So thank you, best of luck in your new role. I think you're going to smash it, and I'm sure we will follow up with you in a few months and find out where you're at.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marissa, for the time today.
Thanks, David. Bye.